The envelope was thick. She opened it standing at the reception desk, still in the paper gown, still barefoot, still 34 weeks pregnant. The first word she saw was divorce. Her husband had filed 4 days ago. 4 days ago, while she was laughing in an elevator with her best friend, while she was reviewing quarterly projections, while she was planning the nursery for their daughter. He had filed, and he was certain that he was about to receive half of everything she had ever built. A billionaire wife, a family empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He had researched it for 18 months. He had a spreadsheet. He had a tab in that spreadsheet called Exit Timeline. There was just one thing he never found. One document, established 31 years ago, when Caroline Whitfield was 2 years old. And when Fletcher Crane, one of the most feared divorce attorneys in the state, opened 412 pages of financial disclosure and looked for the hundreds of millions he expected to divide, he found a savings account, $4,200, and a 4-year-old car. Grant Whitfield had spent 18 months building a map to a treasure he never actually owned. And now, a judge was about to explain that to him. Stay with Caroline's story. Because what happens next is not just about money. It is about what a woman builds when no one is watching, and what she reclaims when someone finally tries to take it. Here is what this story will remind you. The most powerful thing you own is never the thing someone else can see on a spreadsheet. It is the structure you built quietly, the decisions you made before anyone was paying attention, and the clarity that arrives, finally, when you stop looking in the wrong direction. If Caroline's story moved you, if you have ever been underestimated by someone who thought they had you figured out, leave a comment below and tell us. Every story you share helps this community find each other. Like this video if you stayed until the end. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe, because every week we bring you a new story about women who were counted out and came back extraordinary. We will see you in the next one.
The paper crinkled. That was the first sound. The soft, dry crinkle of the examination table paper beneath her as Caroline Whitfield shifted her weight and tried to find a position that didn't make her lower back ache. 34 weeks. The baby had dropped 2 weeks ago, and now everything from her hips down felt like it belonged to someone else. Dr. Bloom had stepped out to check the ultrasound measurements with her technician. The room was small and pale blue. A poster on the wall showed a diagram of fetal development by week. Caroline had memorized it over the course of her prenatal appointments. She knew exactly where she was on that chart. She was in the paper gown. The thin, embarrassing, open at the back paper gown that no amount of money or professional dignity could make feel like anything other than what it was. She had her folded clothes in her lap, her blazer, her blouse, her phone on top of the pile. The phone buzzed. She assumed it was Nora. Nora always texted around 11 in the morning with the day's most urgent updates, formatted as bullet points, because Nora had decided years ago that Caroline processed information better in list form. She was not wrong. Caroline picked up the phone. It was not Nora. It was an unknown number. The message was brief. It said that certified legal documents were waiting for her at the front reception desk. It said she could collect them at her earliest convenience. It said to bring identification. Carolyn read the message twice. She sat there in the paper gown with her folded clothes in her lap, and she read it a third time. Then she got down from the table. She tucked her clothes under her arm. She walked down the hallway in her socks because she had not put her shoes back on, and she walked to the front reception desk, and she said to the young woman behind the counter, "I think there are some documents for me. Caroline Whitfield." The receptionist's expression did something careful and neutral. She reached beneath the counter and produced a thick manila envelope, the kind with the metal clasp. Caroline took it. She opened it, standing right there at the window. The first page had a court seal at the top. Below the seal, in clean professional typeface, were two words: petition for dissolution of marriage. Petitioner: Grant Allen Whitfield. Respondent: Caroline Ann Whitfield. She read it once. She read it again. Her eyes kept moving to the date in the upper right corner. He had filed 4 days ago. 4 days ago, she had been at a board meeting. She had been wearing her navy blazer that no longer buttoned over her stomach, and she had laughed about it with Nora in the elevator on the way up, and Nora had said, "You look powerful, not pregnant." And Caroline had said, "I look like a Navy whale." And they had both laughed. That was 4 days ago. He filed 4 days ago. She was standing at a reception desk in a paper gown holding divorce papers. The receptionist said, very quietly, "Mrs. Whitfield, can I get you some water?" "No," Caroline said. "Thank you." Her voice was steady. She noted this with a distant kind of surprise. Her voice was completely steady. She walked back to the examination room. She sat back down on the crinkly paper table. She put the envelope on the chair beside her. She put her clothes on her lap. She sat with her hands folded over her stomach, and she looked at the fetal development poster on the wall, and she thought, he filed. He actually filed. "I am 34 weeks pregnant and sitting in a paper gown, and my husband filed for divorce." She did not cry. She was not ready to cry yet. When she could not feel things, she made lists. It was something she had always done. Her therapist, 3 years ago, had called it a coping mechanism. Caroline had called it efficiency. They had agreed to disagree. She made a list now. "The baby is healthy. Dr. Bloom said so at the last appointment. Heartbeat strong, position good, weight on track. The baby is fine. Philip is on retainer." Philip Hartley had been the Whitfield family attorney for 20 years. He would know what to do. The trust is intact. The trust was always intact. She was still sitting with her list when Dr. Bloom came back into the room. The doctor saw her face and then saw the envelope on the chair, and she stopped in the doorway. "Caroline," she said, "let's check the baby first, then we can talk." "I'm fine," Caroline said. Dr. Bloom did not say anything to that. She picked up the Doppler and pressed it gently to Caroline's stomach, and the sound filled the small pale blue room, the heartbeat, strong and fast and steady, like a tiny engine that had decided it was not going to be concerned about any of this. Caroline listened to it. She breathed. The heartbeat kept going. She thought, that is the only real thing in this room right now. After the appointment, she walked to the parking garage alone. The spring air outside the medical building was cold and sharp, and she stood next to her car for a moment before she got in. She put the divorce papers on the passenger seat. She looked at them there. In 6 weeks, there would be a car seat in that spot. She got in the car. She called Grant. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She sat in the parking garage with her phone in her lap and the papers on the passenger seat, and the sound of the garage it around her, a distant car starting somewhere, the hum of the ventilation system, her own breathing. She called Nora. Nora picked up on the second ring. "Hey, I just sent you the afternoon schedule. Did you get it?" "Nora," Caroline said. Something in Caroline's voice stopped Nora mid-sentence. "What happened?" Nora asked. "He filed," Caroline said. "Grant filed for divorce." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. "When?" Nora asked. 4 days ago," Caroline said. Another silence. Longer. "Caroline," Nora said, and her voice had shifted into something careful and precise. "Does he know about the Whitfield Trust restructure?" Caroline looked at the divorce papers on the passenger seat. She thought about the trust. She thought about Philip. She thought about the document Philip had walked her through 2 years ago, when the restructure was finalized, when he had said, "Caroline, in the event of a dissolution of marriage, your personal, disclosed assets would be. For the first time since opening that envelope, something moved in Caroline's chest that was not grief. "No," she said. "He does not." She started the car. She drove to her grandmother's house. The iron gates of the Whitfield estate still had the W in the center. Her great-grandfather had commissioned them in 1931, the same year he broke ground on the main house. Caroline had driven through them her entire life. She knew exactly the sound they made, the low, unhurried creak of old iron that had never needed to hurry because it had been built to last. She parked in the front circle and sat in the car for a moment. The house was 3 stories of pale stone, built in the style of the English country houses her great-grandfather had admired during a business trip abroad. It had 22 rooms, a formal garden that her grandmother maintained with the same precision she brought to everything else, and a kitchen that always smelled like whatever Dot was cooking, even when Dot was not cooking. Dot was standing in the front doorway before Caroline reached the steps. Dorothea Mercer was 61 years old and had never once, in Caroline's living memory, appeared in a doorway looking anything other than entirely composed. She was wearing cream trousers and a pale blue cardigan, and her silver hair was pulled back, the way it always was, and she looked at her granddaughter's face and then at the manila envelope in her hand, and she opened the door wider. "Come inside," Dot said. "I'll make tea." "He filed, Gram," Caroline said. "I know. Philip called me." Dot paused. Something behind her eyes went very quiet. "Come inside." The kitchen at the estate was large and warm and smelled like the Earl Grey that Dot kept loose in a ceramic jar by the kettle. Caroline sat at the long kitchen table, the same table she had done homework at as a child, the same table where she and Dot had played cards on Sunday evenings throughout her teenage years. And she put the envelope on the surface in front of her. Dot made tea. She did not speak while she made it. She filled the kettle. She warmed the pot. She measured the leaves. She did all of this with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that some moments required you to do something with your hands. She set the teacup in front of Caroline and sat down across from her. Caroline looked at the envelope. She pulled out the filing again. She turned to the date. 4 days ago. "He sat across from me at breakfast 2 days ago," Caroline said. "He asked about the nursery. He asked if the dresser had arrived." Dot wrapped both hands around her own cup, but did not drink. "He looked at my stomach," Caroline said. "He looked right at it." She stopped. He had already filed. This was the moment the pain became real, not abstract, not the shock of printed words on a page. Real. He had sat across from her and asked about the dresser for their daughter's room, and he had already signed his name to a petition to dissolve their marriage. He had made eye contact with her pregnant body and said nothing. The inner voice went flat and declarative, the way it did when the truth was too large to approach softly. He sat there. He asked about the dresser. He already knew. She opened her phone. She pulled up her calendar, and she went back through the week. 4 days ago. Board meeting. Quarterly projections. Nora's international expansion proposal. She had been in that conference room for 3 hours. She had been good at her job and happy about it, and completely unaware that across the city, her husband was signing paperwork. 3 days ago. Grant came home late. She had made pasta. The simple kind, the kind she made when she was tired and did not want to think about cooking. He said he wasn't hungry. He kissed her on the forehead. She remembered thinking the kiss felt ceremonial, like something you did at a departure. She had pushed the thought away. 2 days ago, breakfast, he asked about the nursery. She said the dresser was arriving Thursday. He nodded and looked at his phone. 1 day ago, a text at 2 in the afternoon, working late. That was all. And now, this table, this envelope, this tea. Did you know? Caroline asked. Not accusingly. She genuinely wanted to know. Did you suspect anything? Dot considered this the way she considered everything, with complete seriousness. I suspected he was not who he presented himself to be, Dot said finally. I did not know when he would show you. Caroline nodded. She looked at her hands on the table. Her wedding ring was still on. Dot said nothing about the ring. Philip is available this afternoon, Dot said instead. He's expecting your call. Caroline's phone buzzed. She looked at it. It was Nora. There was a photograph attached to the message. The message said, I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I kept thinking it might be nothing. Caroline opened the photograph. It was taken at the Anderson and Merritt Firm holiday event 6 weeks ago. Caroline had missed it. She had been on bed rest that week, doctor's orders, blood pressure slightly elevated. She had told Grant to go without her. He had said he would send her regards. In the photograph, taken from across the room by someone who had not intended it as evidence, Grant was standing near the bar. Beside him was a young woman with dark blonde hair in a green dress. His hand was on her lower back, not the hand of a colleague, not the hand of a friend. Caroline looked at the photograph for a long time. She thought about 6 weeks ago. She had been lying on the couch with her feet elevated, watching a documentary about national parks, eating crackers because her appetite had been inconsistent that week. She had texted Grant at 9:30 to say she was going to sleep. He had texted back, "Good night, sleep well." She put her phone face down on the table. "There's a woman," she said, "at his firm." "Yes," Dot said. Simply, quietly, as if she had been holding this word for some time. "You knew about her too." "I suspected," Dot said. "I did not know." Caroline picked up her phone again. She called Nora. "How long have you had this?" she asked. 6 weeks, Nora said. "I'm sorry, Caroline. I kept thinking you were pregnant. You were almost at the end. I kept thinking maybe I was reading it wrong." "You weren't," Caroline said. "No," Nora said. "I know that now. I'm so sorry." Caroline breathed slowly through her nose. The validation whisper came then, not as a question, but as a clean, flat statement. "I'm not crazy. I felt something was wrong for 2 years, and I told myself I was tired and hormonal and too focused on work. I wasn't crazy. I knew." "Call Philip," she told Nora. "Tell him I need the full trust documentation pulled. Everything. Every instrument, every entity, every account. I want to see the complete picture." "Already done," Nora said. "He's expecting you at 4. Caroline ended the call. She looked at Dot across the table. Dot was looking back at her with an expression that was not pity and was not anger. It was something older and more specific than either of those things. It was the look of a woman who had sat at the same table 60 years ago and learned something terrible about a person she had loved, and who had gotten up from the table the next morning and made the tea. "Drink," Dot said, nodding at Caroline's cup. Caroline drank. The tea was warm and slightly bitter, and real. She looked at the divorce papers. She looked at the photograph still open on her phone. She looked at the date on the filing. Then she folded everything back into the envelope and stood up. "I need to see Philip," she said. "Yes," Dot said. "You do." Philip Hartley's office was on the 14th floor of the Whitfield building downtown. He had occupied the same corner suite for 19 years. The furniture was dark walnut, and the bookshelves were full of actual books, and the view from his window looked out over the city in a way that made you feel, when you sat across from his desk, that the city was something you could understand, rather than something that was happening to you. Carolyn sat across from his desk at 4:15 in the afternoon. She was still in her work clothes from the morning. She had not gone home. She did not want to go home yet. Philip was 65 years old and had the manner of a man who had delivered difficult news so many times that he had perfected the exact combination of clarity and compassion required to make difficult news survivable. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him. He had already pulled everything. "Before we go through the documents," he said, "I want to ask you something. How are you feeling physically? The baby." "The baby is fine," Caroline said. "Dr. Bloom confirmed this morning." "Good," Philip said. "That's the most important thing." Then he opened the first folder, and they began. What Philip explained, over the next 40 minutes, was the full architecture of the Whitfield family financial structure. Caroline knew the broad outline. She had been CEO of Whitfield Holdings for 4 years, but she had never needed to see it, specifically in the context of a divorce proceeding, with the specific question of what her husband's attorneys could legally claim. The answer, Philip explained in his measured voice, was almost nothing. The Whitfield Family Trust had been established 31 years ago by Dorothea Mercer following the divorce of her son, Caroline's Uncle Robert, which had nearly cost the family a significant commercial real estate holding in 3 states. Dot's response had been architectural. She had spent 8 months with Philip's predecessor restructuring everything. What Caroline Whitfield personally owned, in her name, as of that morning: one personal checking account, with a working balance of approximately $12,000. One personal savings account, with a balance of $4,217, deliberately kept low. This was intentional. Her personal vehicle, a 4-year-old sedan, value approximately $18,000. Her jewelry, her clothing, that was it. What Caroline Whitfield did not own in her name: the house she lived in with Grant, owned by the Whitfield Family Trust, her salary from Whitfield Holdings, structured as deferred compensation held within a corporate entity, not paid directly to her personal accounts, her equity stake in Whitfield Holdings, held by the trust, the family estate where Dot lived, held by the trust, the investment portfolios, held by subsidiary entities of the trust, the real estate holdings across 7 states, held by various LLC. So beneath the trust structure, the international entities, same. Philip laid this out clearly, page by page, document by document. Grant's attorney, Philip said, will file for equitable distribution of marital assets. He will expect to find hundreds of millions of dollars of assets to divide. He paused. What he will find, Philip said, is a savings account with $4,200 and a 4-year-old car. Caroline looked at the documents in front of her. She thought about the first time Grant had asked her about the corporate structure of Whitfield Holdings. They had been together for 8 months. She had thought it was interest. She had thought he was engaged in her work, that he wanted to understand what she did, that this was what it looked like when someone truly paid attention to the person they were with. She had explained the holding company structure. She had shown him the organizational chart. She had been proud of it. She had built significant parts of it herself. She thought he was taking notes. The memory flooding started quietly, the way a tide comes in. Not a wave, but a slow, unstoppable rising. The first date. He had researched her. At the time, she had found it romantic. He knew her favorite restaurant, knew she preferred sparkling water, knew she had done her MBA at Wharton. She had thought, this man pays attention. She now understood. This man prepared. The proposal. He proposed at the estate. In the garden, on one knee, with her mother watching from the upstairs window and crying. Caroline had been 29. She had just been named CEO. She thought the timing was perfect, serendipitous, the best possible version of her life arriving all at once. She thought he timed the proposal to the promotion deliberately, the prenup conversation. He had said, with what she now recognized as studied sincerity, that he didn't want a prenuptial agreement, that a prenup implied he was thinking about the end before they had even begun, that he loved her without conditions. She had been moved by this. That was the first significant red flag, Philip said, as if reading her thoughts. A man with limited personal assets who insists on no prenuptial agreement is not being romantic. He was planning, Caroline said. Yes, Philip Talapi said. The board meetings. He had asked to attend one about a year into their marriage. She had let him. He had asked detailed questions about the corporate ownership structure. She had thought he was being supportive. She had thought his curiosity about her work meant he respected it. She thought he was building a map. The mirror technique moment arrived here, organic and specific and deeply private. 2 years ago, a Tuesday night in February. Grant had been away on a business trip to Chicago that had lasted 4 days instead of the scheduled 2. He had explained the extension. The explanation had made sense. She had accepted it. But that night, after he came home, she had sat in her home office at midnight and opened her laptop and typed into the search bar, "How to know if your husband married you for money." She had stared at the search results for approximately 30 seconds. Then she had closed the browser. She had felt such a sudden, flooding shame, the kind of shame that comes from catching yourself thinking the unacceptable thing. What kind of person suspected their own husband of something like that? What kind of marriage existed if she was typing that into a search bar at midnight? She had closed the laptop and gone to the kitchen and cleaned it. The entire kitchen. She organized every drawer. She reorganized the pantry. By 2 a.m, the spices were in alphabetical order. She had never touched that search again. I alphabetized the pantry spices at 1 a.m, she thought now, sitting across from Philip with 400 pages of financial architecture between them, because I couldn't let myself think what I was thinking. She said this out loud, quietly. Philip looked at her. That's a very common response, he said. The mind protects itself. Mine was protecting the wrong thing, Caroline said. After the meeting, Philip walked her out. In the elevator, he said, Grant's attorneys are going to file for discovery quickly. They're expecting to find a great deal. When they find what actually exists, there will be a reaction. I want you to be prepared for that. What kind of reaction? Caroline asked. The kind, Philip said carefully, that a man has when the thing he was certain was there turns out not to be there. The breathing room came after Caroline got back into her car in the building garage. She did not drive immediately. She sat in the car and looked through the windshield at the concrete wall, and she breathed. Just breathed. In and out, slowly, the way Dr. Bloom had taught her, for the early labor techniques. The baby moved, a slow, rolling movement. The kind that felt like Eleanor was turning over in her sleep. Caroline put both hands on her stomach. The concrete wall was gray. The garage smelled like exhaust and cold stone. Somewhere 2 levels up, a car alarm briefly sounded and then stopped. The fluorescent light above her buzzed quietly. She sat there for 4 minutes and did not think about anything specific. She just breathed and felt the baby move and let the grief and the cold and the quiet concrete exist without trying to resolve any of it. Then she put the car in reverse and drove home. Not to the house she shared with Grant. She went back to the estate. She was not ready to be in that house yet. 2 days later, Nora called with something new. Caroline was at the estate kitchen table with her laptop open, reviewing the Q2 financial summaries that Nora had forwarded. She was 35 weeks pregnant, and she had slept badly, and she had eaten toast because that was all she wanted, and she had a mug of decaf beside her that had gone lukewarm. I need to tell you something, Nora said, and I want to preface it by saying that my tech team found this legally through our own system access because it was on the home network. Tell me, Carolyn said. Grant has been copying financial documents from your home office for approximately a year, Nora said. Invoices, board presentation materials, contracts, internal projections. He photographed them on his phone. The metadata came back when we ran a security audit on the home system. Caroline set down her mug. How many documents? She asked. We've identified 47 distinct files so far, Nora said. Possibly more. Caroline sat very still. She thought about her home office, the room she had designed herself, with the bookshelves and the good lamp and the framed photograph of the original Whitfield Holdings office from 1962 that her grandfather had given her when she graduated. She thought about working late evenings in that room, Grant sometimes coming in to say goodnight, leaning in the doorway. She had always been glad to see him there. She had thought, this is a man who likes to know where I am. She had thought it was affection. He was photographing her documents. The validation whisper arrived as a statement, clean and uncompromising. He treated our marriage like a corporate acquisition. I kept telling myself he was curious about my work, that he was proud of me, that his interest meant love. It did not mean love. It meant strategy. There's more, Nora said. Tell me. He hired a private financial research firm about 18 months ago, Nora said. They produced a detailed analysis of Whitfield Holdings, public filings, publicly available information, their own research. It's sophisticated work, impressively detailed. And? Caroline asked. They got the surface numbers right, Nora said. The revenue figures, the asset valuations from public records, but they missed the trust structure entirely. The ownership layer is not visible in the public filings because it's not required to be. They saw Whitfield Holdings as a company with a CEO who personally controlled significant equity. They thought I owned it directly, Caroline said. Yes, Nora said. He spent 18 months building a financial picture of you that is completely accurate at the surface and completely wrong about who actually holds what. Caroline looked at the quarterly summary open on her laptop. She thought about Grant at the kitchen table, 2 days before he filed, asking about the nursery. He had been so calm. He had nodded when she described the dresser. He had looked at her with an expression she had interpreted as tenderness. Now she understood it was the expression of a man who believed he had already won. He did his homework, she thought. He spent 18 months doing his homework, and he still got the wrong answer. The chapter's private disaster arrived the next morning. Nora called at 8:30 with a carefully neutral voice that meant the news was not neutral. Grant's attorney is Fletcher Crane, Nora said. Caroline knew the name. Everyone in the city's legal and business community knew Fletcher Crane. He was aggressive, thorough, and had a reputation for finding money that people believed was hidden. He's already filed for formal asset discovery, Nora continued. He wants full financial disclosure within 10 business days. Forward everything to Philip, Caroline said. Already done, Nora said. But Caroline, Philip wants you to know that Fletcher Crane has never lost a major asset discovery case. He is going to come at this from every angle. Good, Caroline said. Nora paused. Good? Let him find everything that exists, Caroline said. Philip will give him everything that exists. There was a short silence. Oh, Nora said. And then, quietly, oh, I see. The semi-public disaster arrived that afternoon. Caroline was at Philip's office for a working session when her personal cell phone rang. Not the office line, her personal cell. A bright, efficient paralegal voice told her that Fletcher Crane's office was reaching out to discuss voluntary asset disclosure to expedite the discovery process. They had her personal number. Grant had given it to them. "My attorney's name is Philip Hartley," Caroline said. Her voice was completely flat and completely polite. "All future communications should be directed to his office." She ended the call. Philip, who had heard the exchange, wrote Fletcher Crane's office number on his legal pad and circled it once. "They're moving quickly," he said. "Yes," Caroline said. "They think there's something to find." That evening, Nora made contact with Vivian Cross. Not a confrontation, not a threat. A carefully worded message that said, "I'm reaching out on behalf of someone who I think has been affected by the same situation as you. I think you may have been misled. I think you deserve to know the truth. I think it would benefit both of you to speak." Vivian called back within the hour. Nora set up a three-way call for the following morning. Caroline, Nora, and Vivian. Caroline sat at Philip's conference table for the call. Nora was beside her. Vivian was on speaker from wherever she was, her apartment presumably, because there was the sound of a refrigerator humming in the background and the particular quality of a small room. Vivian Cross sounded younger than 29. She sounded frightened. She spoke carefully, haltingly, like someone who had rehearsed and then decided the rehearsed version was wrong. She said, "He told me the divorce would be finalized within 60 days, she said. He showed me a spreadsheet. He had projected out the settlement. He said you had significant equity in Whitfield Holdings, and that equitable distribution would give him half. He had specific numbers." She said, "He told me you hadn't been happy together for years. He said you were too focused on the company. He said the baby was a complication in the timing, but that you would be well provided for." She said, "He told me that after the settlement, we could build something together. He had a plan for it. He had already decided where we would live." She stopped. The refrigerator hummed. "He has a tab in the spreadsheet," Vivian said. "He called it Exit Timeline." Caroline looked at Nora across the table. Nora looked back. Exit Timeline. He had a spreadsheet with a tab called Exit Timeline. "What do you want?" Caroline asked. Her voice was even and clear. A pause. "I want out," Vivian said. "I think I made a terrible mistake. I thought I knew who he was. I was wrong." Another pause. "I found the spreadsheet, the one about you. He has it organized by asset class. When I saw that She stopped. "I don't want anything to do with this. Are you willing to provide a formal statement?" Philip asked from the corner, where he had been listening without speaking. "Yes," Vivian said. A brief silence. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what he was. I mean, I made my own choices, and I own that. But I didn't know this." Caroline looked at the speakerphone in the middle of the table for a moment. "Thank you for telling us," she said. "We'll be in touch." She ended the call. The room was quiet. "Exit Timeline," Nora said. "Yes," Philip said. He was writing something on his legal pad. "That will be entered as evidence." Nora looked at Caroline. "How are you doing?" Caroline thought about this honestly. "I'm angry," she said. "I'm actually angry now. I wasn't angry before. I was in shock, and then I was sad, and now I'm angry." "Good," Nora said. "Yes," Philip said, still writing. "It is, actually." Fletcher Crane received the asset disclosure package on a Tuesday morning at 9:15. His paralegal brought it in on a cart. It was 412 pages, printed and bound in 6 sections, each tabbed and labeled, with a comprehensive index at the front. His paralegal set it on his desk with both hands and said, "From Philip Hartley's office. They messengered it this morning." Then she left. Fletcher looked at the package. He was accustomed to large disclosures. Large disclosures meant large assets, and large assets meant a significant case and a significant fee. He was pleased. He poured a fresh cup of coffee. He opened to the index. He started reading. He turned pages. He turned more pages. His coffee went cold. He did not notice. The first section, personal banking accounts. One checking account, one savings account. Standard balances. He noted the savings account with a small frown. $4,217. That was the kind of number a graduate student had in savings, not a CEO. He turned to the next section. Personal property, one vehicle, the jewelry inventory. Prepared by a certified appraiser, $63,000 total, largely predating the marriage. The clothing inventory. He turned to the next section. He was waiting for the equity disclosure. The Whitfield Holdings equity stake. The real estate holdings. The investment portfolios. The compensation structure. He kept turning pages. He went back to the beginning. He read the cover letter from Philip Hartley, 3 paragraphs long, written in the measured language of a man who had been waiting a specific amount of time to send exactly this letter. The letter stated that the disclosure represented complete and legally verified documentation of all personal assets held in the name of Caroline Ann Whitfield. It noted that the disclosure had been prepared in full compliance with the court's discovery requirements. It noted that copies had been filed with the court. It wished Fletcher's office a productive review. Fletcher sat at his desk with the package and his cold coffee and 412 pages of almost nothing. He picked up his phone. He called Grant. Grant picked up immediately. He had been waiting. "Did you get the disclosure?" Grant asked. His voice was eager, the voice of a man expecting good news. "I got a disclosure," Fletcher said. He chose his next words with the precision of a man who needed to deliver specific information to a specific person who was not going to receive it well. "Grant, I need to ask you something directly. Does your wife have a trust?" A beat of silence. "She comes from money," Grant said. "Her family is worth hundreds of millions. The company alone—" "Her family," Fletcher said, "may indeed be worth hundreds of millions. Her family's trust, her family's company, her family's holdings." He paused. "Your wife, personally in her own name, as of the most recent documentation provided by her attorney, is worth approximately $67,000 in liquid and tangible personal assets." The silence on the other end was different now. It was not the silence of surprise. It was the silence of someone whose internal architecture was rearranging itself under significant pressure. "That can't be right," Grant said. "I have 412 pages of documentation that says it is," Fletcher replied. "I need to know everything you know about the trust structure. Everything." Meanwhile, at the Whitfield estate, Caroline was on the phone with Nora. Nora had a source at a firm adjacent to Fletcher Crane's. Not illegal, not a breach. Simply a network that existed because it had always existed in this city among people who had known each other for decades. The source had called Nora at 9:45 to say that Fletcher Crane had been sitting in his office with the disclosure package for 45 minutes and had not taken any other calls. Caroline listened to this. She did not feel triumphant. Not yet. Not entirely. She felt something more complicated and more honest than triumph. She thought about 6 years ago, the first time Grant had held her hand across a restaurant table and looked at her with what she had believed, fully believed, was love. She thought about lying awake next to him in the early years, watching him sleep and thinking, "This is the person. This is the person I have been looking for." She thought about telling Dot, quietly, in this same kitchen, "Graham, I think he's the one. I think he actually sees me. Not the company, Not the name, me. She had wanted so badly to be seen, she had let the wanting make her careless. The inner voice did not soften this. I knew. Not everything. Not the spreadsheet and the research firm and the exit timeline tab. But I knew, on some level, what I was being to him. I chose not to look directly at it because the alternative was unbearable. That was not weakness. That was human. But it was also over. 2 days after the disclosure delivery, Grant made his mistake. He called Caroline's direct line at Whitfield Holdings. Not her personal cell, the main line. He asked to be put through. The receptionist transferred the call to Caroline's office, where Caroline was in a working session with Nora and 2 members of the finance team. Nora saw the transfer come through. She looked at Caroline. Caroline picked up. She put the call on speaker without deciding to, or perhaps she decided. She was not entirely certain. Grant's voice filled the office. He was not composed. The controlled man who had sat across from her at breakfast and asked about the nursery was gone. What was in his place was something raw and less managed. You hid the money, he said. No greeting, just that. I disclosed every asset I personally own, Caroline said. Fully and legally. You know what I mean, Grant said. The family, the trust, the company. You knew what I was expecting. Caroline looked across the desk at Nora. Nora was looking back at her with an expression that was absolutely still. Yes, Grant, Caroline said. I know exactly what you were expecting. A silence. This isn't over, Grant said. Fletcher is filing a motion. The trust is fraudulent conveyance. He can prove it. Philip will look forward to responding to that, Caroline said. She ended the call. The office was silent. One of the finance team members said, very carefully, Should we? We'll need a recording of that call, Philip said from the doorway. He had arrived 2 minutes ago, and no one had noticed. The exchange constitutes an admission of financial expectation in the marriage. It's useful. The system records all incoming calls, Nora said. Excellent, Philip said. He came fully into the room and set his briefcase on the conference table. Then let's talk about the fraudulent conveyance motion. 11 days after receiving the divorce papers, Caroline went home. Not to the estate. Home, the house she shared with Grant. The house that was, technically, owned by the Whitfield Family Trust, which meant it was not hers or Grant's to dispute, but which was, in every other sense, hers. She had chosen the paint colors. She had chosen the furniture. She had planted the roses along the front path in her first spring there, because she had thought, we will be here long enough for roses to matter. Grant had moved out 4 days ago. She did not know where he was staying. She had not asked. The house was quiet, in the way that houses become when the person who used to make noise in them is gone. Not peaceful, just vacant feeling, like a body that is technically fine but knows something is missing. She walked through the rooms slowly. She stood in the kitchen and put the kettle on, the way Dot had taught her, because your hands need something to do. She stood in the living room and looked at the bookshelves where their books were mixed together and thought, I'll need to sort those. She stood in the doorway of the room that had been his home office and looked at the empty desk and the pale rectangles on the wall where things had hung, and she felt nothing specific about any of it. Then she walked to the nursery. The nursery was yellow, the softest possible yellow, the color of afternoon light in late winter, the color that the paint chip at the store had been called something like morning warmth, and that Caroline had held up to Dot under natural light, and Dot had said yes, that one. The custom dresser had arrived Thursday. White painted wood, little brass handles, shaped like stars. It stood against the east wall, and Caroline ran her hand along the top of it in the dark. feeling the smooth paint. The mobile above the crib was small felt birds and soft grays and creams. She had ordered it from a woman in Vermont who made them by hand. The books on the shelf were arranged by color, not alphabetically, not by author, but by color, because she had wanted the room to feel like something a child would love to look at. She sat in the rocking chair. The chair was a reproduction of the one that had been in Dot's nursery, made by the same craftsman who built the dresser. It fit her exactly right. She had sat in it during the final fitting when it was delivered, just to check, and had thought, I could fall asleep in this. She did not fall asleep. She sat in the yellow room at 11 at night, and then at midnight, and then at 1 in the morning, and she looked at the felt birds, and she breathed. The white noise machine that the delivery crew had left on was humming softly. The window latch had a small lavender sachet that Dot had hung there when the room was finished. The smell of it was faint and clean. Outside, the street was quiet. Occasionally a car passed. The old house made its sounds. The small settling noises of a building that had stood for many years and intended to stand for many more. She talked to Eleanor. I knew, she said quietly. The room was dark, except for the nightlight Nora had installed as a test, shaped like a small moon, casting a pale circle on the ceiling. Not everything, but enough. I knew something was wrong, and I chose not to look at it, because I was so tired of being alone. Eleanor moved, the slow, rolling movement she made at night, the one that felt like turning over. I had built something enormous, Caroline said. A whole company, a whole structure, and I was so tired of sitting inside it alone. I wanted someone in the room, with me. I wanted to come home to someone. She stopped. She thought about the midnight Google search, the alphabetized spices, the 1,000 small moments of choosing not to see. The validation whisper came then, the most honest and most private one in the entire story. Somewhere along the way, being loved by the wrong person started feeling better than being seen by no one. That was my mistake. Not trusting him because I needed to, using my needing as a reason to stop looking clearly. She sat with that truth for a long time. The room held it without judgment. The felt birds were still. The moon nightlight cast its circle. Eleanor turned. I was my own warden, Caroline said. I built the cage and called it love and gave someone else the key and was surprised when he used it wrong. She breathed. But you, she said, you are not a mistake. You are not a complication in anyone's timeline. You are the best decision I ever made, and I made it alone, and I would make it 1,000 times. Eleanor moved again. Decisively, Caroline thought, the way she did things. It was nearly 3 in the morning when Dot appeared in the doorway. Caroline had not heard her come in. Dot had a key. She had always had a key. Dot did not speak. She walked in and sat on the window seat and looked out at the dark garden. She was wearing her dressing gown. She had driven over. They sat in silence for a while. Were you ever afraid? Caroline asked finally. After Granddad left? Dot considered this with her characteristic seriousness. The first morning after your grandfather left, she said, I was terrified. I was 44 years old with 3 children and a company to run, and I sat at that kitchen table, and I thought, who am I now? Who am I without someone to come home to? She paused and looked at the dark garden. And then the kettle boiled, she said, and I got up and I made tea. And the next morning I did the same thing, and the morning after that. She looked at Caroline. You don't figure out who you are in the dark. You figure it out by getting up every morning and making the tea. Caroline looked at her grandmother. I'm scared, Caroline said. I know, Dot said. Not of him, not of the case, of doing this wrong, of Eleanor needing something I don't know how to give. Every mother is afraid of exactly that, Dot said. The good ones, anyway. The breathing room that followed was the deepest quiet of the entire story. Dot brought the blanket from the chest in the corner and draped it over Caroline's lap without being asked. They sat together in the yellow room, in the dark, while the white noise machine hummed and the lavender was faint in the air, and Eleanor moved occasionally inside her mother, and the moon nightlight cast its small pale circle on the ceiling. They did not speak again for almost an hour. Caroline fell asleep in the rocking chair. When she woke in the early morning gray light, Dot was gone and a note was on the dresser in Dot's small, precise handwriting. It said, "Tea is made. It will keep." Caroline sat in the rocking chair in the yellow room and felt something shift. Not healed, not resolved, not over, but shifted. She put her hand on her stomach and felt Eleanor move into the morning with her. She thought, okay, we know what we're doing now. She got up and made the tea. The call with Vivian happened on a Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. Carolyn was in Philip's conference room. Nora was beside her. The room was clean and quiet, and the afternoon light came through the tall windows at an angle that made everything look slightly more deliberate than usual. Vivian was on speaker from her apartment. The refrigerator was humming again. Caroline had begun to think of it as a landmark. The refrigerator that was always humming in the background of Vivian Cross's difficult moments. Vivian spoke for 20 minutes. She spoke without stopping, as if she had practiced this and was afraid that stopping would mean not finishing. She was not reading from notes. She was remembering out loud. Grant had told her 8 months ago that his marriage had been over for 2 years. He had told her that Caroline was brilliant but cold, that she cared more about the company than the relationship, that she had never truly let him in. He had told her this with the expression of a man who had been patient for a long time and was finally being honest. He had shown her the spreadsheet 6 months ago. He had laid his laptop on Vivian's kitchen table and opened it with the air of someone sharing something important, something that proved the seriousness of his intentions. The spreadsheet had multiple tabs. There were projected settlement figures. There was a tab for post-divorce budget planning. There was the tab called Exit Timeline. He had told her, within 60 days of filing, we'll have what we need. He had told her they could look at apartments. He had shown her neighborhoods. He had sent her listings. He had made her feel chosen, Vivian said. He had made her feel like the person he was choosing when he could finally choose freely. And then, Vivian said, 3 weeks ago I came to his apartment when he wasn't expecting me. He was on the phone with Fletcher Crane. I heard parts of it. A pause. He was describing your assets like items on a shipping manifest. Square footage and account numbers and equity percentages. Like the cargo list. She stopped. I found the spreadsheet on the open laptop on his desk. The one about you. I read the whole thing. The refrigerator hummed. The first tab, Vivian said quietly, is called Acquisition. Caroline looked at the speakerphone. She looked at Nora. Nora's jaw was set in the specific way it's set when she was absorbing information she was going to act on. What do you want? Caroline asked. I want out, Vivian said. I don't want anything from you. I don't want money or protection or... I just want to not be part of this. I made choices I'm not proud of, and I understand what that means, but I don't want to be part of what he's doing. A breath. And I think you should know what you're dealing with. Are you willing to provide a formal statement? Philip asked. Yes, Vivian said. And then, after a silence, is she okay? The baby? Caroline blinked. It was such an unexpected question that for a moment she did not know how to answer it. "She's well," Caroline said. "She's strong." "Good," Vivian said, very quietly. "Good." "Thank you, Vivian," Philip said. "We'll be in contact about the statement." The call ended. The room was quiet. "The acquisition tab," Nora said. "Yes," Philip said. He was writing. That, along with the exit timeline tab and the recorded phone call, constitutes a fairly comprehensive picture of intent. Caroline sat, with her hands flat on the conference table. She thought about Vivian's voice. She thought about the fear in it, the genuine shame, the question about the baby. She thought about being 29 and believing what you needed to believe, choosing the version of events that allowed you to feel chosen rather than used. She had done her own version of that. She understood it. She did not forgive Vivian. Forgiveness was a longer project than a 20-minute phone call, but she understood her. Nora said, gently, "How are you doing?" "I'm building something," Caroline said. "I can feel it. It's not what I thought I was building, but it's something." The chapter moved into the small acts of reclamation that were Layer 6's real content. Not dramatic, not public, quiet. She changed her passwords, all of them, not because she thought Grant had access to them, he didn't, but because she wanted to, because each changed password was a small door she was closing and locking from the inside. She called a board meeting for the following Wednesday, not a crisis meeting, a regular quarterly review, slightly early. She sent the agenda herself rather than having Nora draft it. This was not usual. The board noticed. She called Margaret. Her mother answered on the third ring with the slightly formal tone she defaulted to when she was uncertain of the emotional register of a conversation. "I wanted you to know," Caroline said, "that the legal situation is under control, and the baby is well, and I'm at the estate right now." A silence. "I'll come tomorrow," Margaret said. "You don't have to." "I'll come tomorrow," Margaret said again, with a different tone, the tone of someone who has decided and is not reconsidering. Margaret came the next day and sat in Dot's kitchen and drank tea and said relatively little, which was both characteristic and, in this case, the exactly right choice. She brought tulips from her garden. She put them in the blue ceramic pitcher on the windowsill. She sat across from Caroline and looked at her daughter with an expression that Caroline could not entirely rid, but that felt like something being offered. "I should have told you more clearly," Margaret said eventually, not looking at her, "what I thought about him." "What did you think?" Caroline asked. Margaret straightened the cup in front of her. "I thought he was studying you," she said. "From the beginning. I thought he was learning you the way you learned something you intend to own." Caroline looked at her mother. "I thought you'd chosen him," Margaret said. "And I didn't want to be the one to—" She stopped, looked at the tulips. "I should have said it anyway. Maybe," Caroline said, "but I might not have listened." Margaret looked back at her. Something in her expression changed. Not softened exactly, but opened slightly. "No," she said, "probably not." The dinner that evening was Dot and Margaret and Caroline at the kitchen table with pasta and wine for Dot and Margaret and sparkling water for Caroline, and the conversation moved from topic to topic the way it does when people are being careful with each other and also learning how to stop being careful. It lasted 2 hours. The mirror technique moment in this chapter was the dinner itself. The image of 3 women at a kitchen table being careful and imperfect and trying, which needed no explanation and no embellishment, because every woman who has ever sat at a table with complicated family has lived some version of it. The hook at the chapter's end, Philip called after dinner. Fletcher Crane had filed the fraudulent conveyance motion, He was arguing that the Whitfield Trust was specifically structured to shield assets from spousal claims, and that this constituted fraud against the marital estate. "He's reaching," Philip said, "but the motion requires a hearing, which means a courtroom, which means Grant will be there." A pause. "I know," Caroline said. "Are you prepared for that?" Caroline looked at the tulips and the blue pitcher on the windowsill. "Yes," she said. "I've been prepared for that since the parking garage." The family court hearing room was small. Wood paneling, 4 rows of seating, fluorescent lights that were slightly too bright and made everything look slightly more institutional than it needed to. The kind of room where important things happened without any of the visual drama that important things are often imagined to require. Caroline arrived with Philip at 8:45, 15 minutes early. She was 37 weeks pregnant, and her back had been aching since 4 in the morning, a low persistent ache that Dr. Bloom said was normal and would only get more interesting in the coming weeks. She was wearing a charcoal blazer, one that actually buttoned, which felt like a small victory. And her hair was pulled back the way she wore it for board meetings. She sat at the respondents' table with Philip and arranged the folders in front of her and looked at the room. Nora was in the gallery. Dot was in the gallery. She had asked them both to come, not for support, exactly, but for presence, to be in the room. Margaret was in the gallery too. Carolyn had not invited her specifically. She had simply told her mother when and where the hearing was, and Margaret had appeared. This, Carolyn thought, was its own kind of statement. Grant arrived at 2 minutes to 9 with Fletcher Crane. He was in a navy suit. His tie was slightly crooked. She noticed this with a detachment that surprised her. 6 months ago, she would have reached over and straightened it without thinking. This was not 6 months ago. He did not look at her when he came in. He sat at the petitioner's table with Fletcher and arranged his own folders and looked at the bench and did not look at her. Judge Patricia Doan entered at 9 exactly. She was in her late 50s and had the expression of someone who had been a family court judge for a very long time and had accordingly seen every possible human variation of the situation currently before her. She had silver hair and reading glasses, and she moved to the bench with the efficiency of a person who had a full docket and intended to get through it. "Whitfield versus Whitfield," she said. "Petitioner's motion for declaration of fraudulent conveyance regarding the Whitfield Family Trust. Counselor Crane, you may proceed." Fletcher Crane stood. He was good. Carolyn had known he would be good, and he was. He presented the argument with technical precision and controlled confidence. He argued that the Whitfield Family Trust, while established prior to the marriage, had been restructured and amended in ways that specifically insulated marital assets from spousal claims. He had documentation of trust amendments dating to 4 years ago. He had expert witnesses prepared to testify regarding standard trust amendment practices. He argued this for 22 minutes without stopping. When he finished, Judge Doan looked at him over her reading glasses for a moment. "Counselor Hartley," she said. "Response." Philip stood. He placed one document before the court, a single document, the original Whitfield Family Trust Establishment Papers, dated 31 years ago. "Your Honor," Philip said, "the Whitfield Family Trust was established in the year Caroline Whitfield was 2 years old. She met the petitioner 29 years after its establishment. The trust has been amended over the years, as all living trusts are, but its fundamental ownership structure, the structure that Counselor Crane argues, was designed to shield marital assets, predates this marriage, any possibility of this marriage, and indeed predates the respondent's professional life by approximately 27 years. He sat down. Judge Doan looked at the document. She picked it up. She looked at the date. She set it down. She looked at Fletcher Crane. The room was quiet in the specific way that rooms become quiet when something has just been made very clear. "Counselor," Judge Doan said, and her voice was measured in the way that measured voices become when they are choosing not to be something else. "Are you asking this court to find fraudulent conveyance in a trust that was established approximately 3 decades before your client met the respondent?" Fletcher opened his mouth. "I want to be precise," Judge Doan continued, "in my understanding of what you're alleging. So I'd like you to explain directly what specific act of fraudulent conveyance you are claiming occurred, and when." Fletcher proceeded. He referred to the amendments. He referred to the timing of the most recent amendment, which had occurred 2 years into the marriage. Judge Doan asked Philip to speak to the amendment. Philip provided documentation showing that the amendment in question had been a standard administrative update to the trustee succession plan, replacing a trustee who had retired and had no effect on the beneficial ownership structure or the asset composition. Judge Doan read the documentation. "Motion denied," she said. Fletcher moved to his secondary argument, an attempt to claim that Caroline's deferred compensation, received through the corporate entity during the marriage, should be considered marital income subject to distribution. Philip responded with the original compensation structure documentation and the corporate entity formation papers, both predating the marriage. "Motion denied," Judge Doan said. Fletcher made a third argument, a fourth, each one finding a different angle of approach, each one more strained than the last. By the fourth denial, Judge Doan's responses had shortened to 2 words, and she had removed her reading glasses and was looking at Fletcher Crane with an expression that had moved past measured into something terser. Motion denied. Motion denied. And then it was over. What Grant Whitfield would receive in the divorce. His personal belongings, his vehicle, his retirement account contributions from his own employment. No spousal support, child support calculated from his income. A visitation schedule to be negotiated separately. What Caroline Whitfield would retain, primary custody of Eleanor. The house, trust property, for Eleanor to grow up in. Her company, her trust, her everything that had always been her everything. The gavel came down. The callback to the opening happened then, in the quiet moment after the hearing ended, and people were gathering their papers, and the room was shifting from formal to ordinary. Caroline was putting her folders into her bag. She was not moving quickly. There was no urgency now. Grant stood at his table. He was talking quietly and with controlled fury to Fletcher Crane. Fletcher was talking back with the expression of a man recalibrating, professionally, what he had believed he was walking into. And then Grant looked at her. He turned and looked at Caroline directly, for the first time since they had walked into the room. She looked back. She did not look away. She did not need to. She had nothing to defend and nothing to perform. She looked at him with the clear, steady gaze of someone who had been in a parking garage in a paper gown and had made it to this room and was going to make it out of this room and was going to keep going after that. He looked back at her. She thought she could see, in his face, the exact moment he understood. Not the legal situation. He had understood the legal situation for weeks. Something else. The moment he understood that whatever he had thought he was taking from her, she had never actually given him. That the thing he thought he had gotten close to had never been available to him. That the woman sitting across from him had been, the entire time, exactly what the estate gates said. Whitfield. His name was borrowed. Hers was built. He looked away first. Philip was at her shoulder. "Ready?" "Yes," Caroline said. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the room. In the parking garage, the same car, same gray concrete walls, the same ventilation hum. She sat in the driver's seat for exactly as long as she needed to. The papers were not on the passenger seat this time. The passenger seat was empty. A car seat would go there in 3 weeks. She sat with the quiet for a moment, not the same quiet as that first day. That had been the quiet of shock, of standing at the edge of something that had just dropped away. This was different. This was the quiet on the other side of something, the quiet that comes after. She started the car. She drove to the estate. Dot made pasta. They ate dinner at the kitchen table, all of them. Dot and Margaret and Nora and Philip and Caroline, and the conversation was not about the hearing. It was about Nora's spring travel plans, and Margaret's tulips, and something Dot had read about the restoration of an old country house in the north of England that had briefly been used as a convalescent home during the Second World War and had now been returned to its original garden design. It was a very good dinner. Eleanor Grace Whitfield was born on a Tuesday. She arrived at 6:44 in the morning, after 20 hours of labor that were not short, but were also not extraordinary, in the delivery suite at Whitfield Medical Partners, where Dr. Bloom had been delivering babies for 14 years. She weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces. She had a full head of dark hair and, immediately, an expression that Dr. Bloom described as the expression of someone who had already decided she had things to figure out. Nora was in the waiting room. Dot was in the waiting room. Margaret was in the waiting room. Caroline had not specifically asked her to come. She had told her mother the due date, and when she had gone into labor at 10 the previous evening, she had sent a brief text, and Margaret had been in the waiting room when Caroline arrived. This was, in its own way, a complete story. Dr. Bloom placed Eleanor on Caroline's chest at 6:44 in the morning, skin to skin, the way they had discussed, the way the research recommended. Eleanor was small and warm, and absolutely certain of herself in the way that newborns are, having just done something remarkable, and not yet having been told that remarkable things require anxiety. Caroline held her. The room was quiet with the specific quality that delivery rooms have at the moment after. A held breath quality, as if the room itself understood that something irrevocable had just occurred and was giving everyone a moment to register it. She looked at Eleanor's face. Eleanor looked back. She had the serious expression already. It was already completely itself. It was the expression of someone who had arrived with opinions. "Hi," Caroline said. Eleanor continued looking. "I know," Caroline said. "I have things to figure out, too." The inner voice was the quietest it had been in the entire story, and the most clear. I thought having her would be the happiest moment of my life, and also one of the saddest, because of everything that had happened. I was wrong. Sitting here, I don't feel anything about Grant. I don't feel triumph or grief or anger or any of the things I thought I would be carrying. I just feel this weight, this breathing, this person. I was afraid of doing this alone, but I am not alone. I was never alone. I was looking in the wrong direction. Eleanor moved her hand, curled her fingers around Caroline's. The first week was what the first week always is. The 2-hour feeding intervals, the surprising and absolute smallness of a 7-pound person, the specific quality of exhaustion that contains, despite itself, something that is not quite happiness, but is adjacent to it and more durable. The white noise machine from the nursery had been brought to the hospital room. The lavender sachet was in Caroline's bag. These were small choices that had been made months ago for a different version of this day and were still exactly right. Nora brought food every day. The kind of food you could eat with one hand while the other arm held a baby, which Nora had researched with the same methodology she brought to quarterly projections. Dot brought the blanket from the nursery chest on the second day. She sat in the visitor's chair and held Eleanor for 40 minutes while Caroline slept a real sleep, the first one since labor began. When Caroline woke up, Dot was looking at Eleanor with an expression that was entirely private and entirely clear. "She looks like your grandfather," Dot said. The same certainty. Margaret came on the third day. She sat for an hour. She did not stay long, and she did not say much, which was characteristic. But before she left, she put a small carved wooden bird on the windowsill. It was pale wood, simply shaped, the kind of thing made by hand in a small studio. "For the mobile," she said. "If you want." Caroline looked at the small bird. "I want," she said. On the third day, Grant sent a text. "Congratulations, my attorney will be in touch about the visitation schedule." Caroline read it. She put Eleanor in the bassinet. She went to the bathroom. She washed her face with cold water, which was something she had done since childhood when she needed to be clear-headed. She looked at herself in the mirror, tired, unmade, wearing a hospital gown, genuinely satisfied for a moment. Then she went back and picked up her daughter. She texted back, "My attorney will handle it." And she put her phone on the windowsill next to her mother's carved bird and did not look at it again until the following morning. The secondary ending arrived on a Friday afternoon. Eleanor was 11 days old. Caroline was at the kitchen table at the estate. She was staying at the estate for the first few weeks, a decision that had not been formally made, but it happened the way good decisions sometimes do, gradually and without drama. Eleanor was in the carrier on Caroline's chest, asleep, her face pressed against her mother's sternum in the determined way she slept, as if sleep were something to be pursued with commitment. Philip messengered the final divorce decree. It arrived in a regular envelope, not a dramatic one, just a manila envelope with Philip's firm's return address in the upper left corner. Caroline opened it at the kitchen table. She read it through once. She signed it. She put the pen down. Nora, who had been reviewing the spring projections on her laptop across the table. The Friday afternoon check-in had, without formal announcement, migrated to the Whitfield Estate kitchen approximately 2 weeks ago. Closed her laptop. Dot, who was making tea, turned from the counter. Margaret, who had stopped by to bring more tulips and had been showing no signs of leaving, looked up from her phone. "Done," Caroline said. A moment. Then Nora opened her laptop again and said, "I'll have the international expansion timeline ready for the Monday call." Dot poured tea. Margaret put her phone in her pocket and said, "Those tulips need water. Does someone have a vase?" Eleanor slept. The morning light came through the east windows of the Whitfield Estate kitchen and landed on the table and the cups and the tulips and the signed decree and the sleeping baby and the women who were, in various ways and with various histories and various degrees of ease, present for each other. Caroline drank her tea. It was warm and slightly bitter and real. 6 weeks after Eleanor was born, Dr. Bloom cleared Caroline for light activity. She walked every morning, 30 minutes around the estate grounds in the early spring cold, in the particular quality of light that early mornings have before the world has fully committed to the day. The stone path that wound through the formal garden and along the edge of the property and back through the kitchen garden where Dot grew herbs, and in summer, tomatoes. The stone was cold underfoot, even through her shoes. The air smelled like earth and the very first green things, the tentative, determined green of early spring in a garden that has been carefully kept for many years. The iron gates were visible from the far corner of the path, the W still centered in the ironwork, catching the early light. She did not think about the business on these walks. She looked at the garden. She thought about her great-grandfather, who had built this house at 31, the same age she was now. She thought about Dot at 44 at the kitchen table, and the kettle boiling, and the getting up. She thought, this is mine, not the money, not the structure, the getting up. That has always been mine. 8 weeks after Eleanor was born, Caroline returned to Whitfield Holdings for the first time. Not full-time. The Thursday board meeting to start. She arrived at the building with Eleanor in the carrier and walked through the lobby and took the elevator to the 14th floor where she had worked for 4 years, and where, she noted, every person who saw her stopped what they were doing briefly, which was not the effect of the baby alone. The board meeting had been arranged by Nora with the particular thoughtfulness that was Nora's professional signature. The agenda was tight and efficient. There was a padded mat in the corner of the conference room, noted in the agenda as available. There was a privacy screen. The coffee was good. Eleanor slept through the first 40 minutes of the meeting, then woke and looked at the international expansion presentation with what the COO described as healthy skepticism regarding the European timeline. The board, Caroline noted, seemed to find this appropriate. The meeting was productive. Whitfield Holdings was fine. It had always been fine. It would continue to be fine. 10 weeks after Eleanor was born, Caroline called Vivian Cross. She did this alone, not in Philip's conference room, not with Nora beside her. She sat in her home office, the room where the good lamp was, and the framed photograph of the original Whitfield Holdings office from 1962, and she dialed the number herself. Vivian answered after 2 rings. "Caroline," she said. "I wanted to tell you," Caroline said, "that the settlement is finalized. The legal proceedings are complete. You don't need to carry anything connected to this anymore." A silence. "Thank you," Vivian said. Thank you." "I'm not calling to be generous," Caroline said, because she was who she was, which was someone who said true things. "I'm calling because I thought about you at 29, and I thought about believing what you need to believe about someone. Because the alternative is unbearable. I've done my own version of that." Another silence. "How is the baby?" Vivian asked. "Excellent," Caroline said. "Very serious. Already has opinions about things." Vivian laughed. Briefly and unexpectedly, the laugh of someone who has been tense for a long time and has briefly, genuinely, been surprised into relief. "Good," she said. "She should." "Yes," Caroline said. "She should." She ended the call. She sat in her office for a moment. Then she went back to the kitchen, where Eleanor was in the bouncy seat, looking at the light coming through the window, with the focused attention she brought to all light sources. And Caroline made tea and stood by the window, looking at the garden, and thought about nothing specific, and nothing urgent, and nothing that needed to be resolved. The wisdom moment arrived here, in the ordinary morning light, not as a speech, but as a thought. The kind of thought that arrives when you have been through something and come out the other side and are standing in your kitchen with good tea and a baby who is looking at the light. The prison door had been unlocked the whole time. I am the architect of this company, this trust, this structure. I built it. I maintained it. I understood every piece of it. And I let myself believe that without someone to come home to, none of it meant enough. It meant everything. It just needed the right person inside it. The right person was always me. The right person is us now. The circular ending brought the story back to where it began. Dr. Bloom's office. The same building, the same parking garage, the same elevator. Eleanor's 8-week checkup. Caroline carried her in the car seat. The car seat that had occupied the passenger seat of her car since the day she came home from the hospital, and she walked into the medical building and through the lobby and to the pediatric reception desk where they checked in and sat in the waiting room. Her phone buzzed. It was Nora. The message said, Grant's attorney sent a follow-up query about the international entities. Phillips already on it. FYI only. Don't let it interrupt the appointment. Caroline looked at the message. She looked at Eleanor in the car seat beside her. Eleanor was looking at the ceiling. There was a mobile above the waiting area. Simple shapes and primary colors. The kind of thing put there for exactly this purpose. Suti. And Eleanor was examining it with her characteristic seriousness. Someone's asking about the money again, Carolyn told her. Eleanor examined the immobile. Phillips handling it, Carolyn said. Eleanor turned her serious gaze to her mother. You're right, Caroline said. Completely irrelevant. She put her phone in her pocket. The nurse appeared in the doorway and called Eleanor's name. Caroline picked up the car seat and carried her daughter into the appointment and did not think about Grant or the motion or the international entities or any of the architecture of the past 4 months. She thought about Eleanor's weight and Eleanor's measurements and Eleanor's serious expression and the felt birds on the mobile and the carved wooden bird from Margaret now hanging among them. She thought, I built the architecture. I will build the next one too. I know how. I have always known how. I just needed to remember that the most important structure I ever built was not a trust or a company or a holding entity. It was this breathing, this weight. This particular and specific and irreplaceable person looking at the world and deciding, already, that she has things to figure out. The door to the exam room closed softly behind them. Eleanor looked at the room with her serious eyes. Caroline looked at Eleanor. Outside, the spring was arriving. The real spring. The committed spring, the kind that doesn't apologize for the winter that preceded it. The kind that simply begins. The kind that grows. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaning, value, and a story worth carrying with you.